Welcome to Blue Glasses Math. In this podcast, we will explore how our self-perception as math teachers and learners influences our approach to life. Whether you identify as a math enthusiast or not, this podcast is for you. Are you a teacher, a parent, a school administrator, or a student? Join me as we shift our perspective on what it means to be a math person. Let's take a look. Of this, so awesome. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for being here with me to have a great conversation on Blue Glasses Math. I'm so happy to have you here. Before I have you introduce yourself to the listeners, I just want to put a little context here. I follow you on Instagram, and I will put your Instagram handle in the show notes with anything else you would like me to add. But I follow you on Instagram, and you have a whiteboard that it seems like you write different quotes on, maybe on a daily basis. I'm not sure. You can tell us later. But this is what stood out to me, and I have it written here on this Post-it note. It was a quote by Marva Collins, and it said, "If you can't make a mistake, you can't make anything." And as soon as I saw that, it was about 3 weeks ago. I actually just went back tonight to check the timeline, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So the next day, I sent you a message. I said, I need to talk to you on my podcast, because if you can't make a mistake, you can't make anything, I think is such a powerful quote. And the fact that you found importance in that, I thought was amazing. So how about you let the listeners know a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into it.
That sounds great. Well, obviously, thank you so much for inviting me. I love speaking about the awesome things that happen in my classroom and the awesome things that my students doing. So I'm just really excited to be here and share whatever they're doing. So my name is Mark Siegel. I am currently a chemistry and design teacher. I guess you would call me a STEM educator if you want to go generic, Middletown High School South in Middletown, New Jersey. This is my 25th year in education, my 14th year at South. I have had a lot of hats in my career, too many to list. But just at South, I have been a chemistry teacher, a physics teacher, an educational technology specialist, and the director of science, health, and PE at various points in 14 years.
Wow.
Not all at the same time. Some of those were at the same time, but not all at the same time. I have taught all levels of chemistry. I currently teach like a college prep level, but I've taught honors. I've taught AP. I teach a class called Innovation and Design, which is a hands-on learn by doing design class. We build a lot of things out of cardboard because wood is very expensive, but I basically teach the elements of design thinking to the kids, and it's all learn by doing. I give them ideas. Right now they're working on mousetrap powered vehicles. So I tell them what they can't do. And then I don't really tell them what they can do. Like, I just give them the restrictions, and the restrictions really come down to it has to travel 15 feet and it has to come to a dead stop. So it's like, you look at mousetrap vehicles on the internet, it's always like, let them go as far as they can. I don't want that. I want to put constraints on the kids, make it so that they can't just build the longest car ever. It has to do this very specific thing when they're done. So anyway, and then to come back to your quotes, I started the hashtag Words of Awesome. Let's see, probably got to be 11 or 12 years now. And I was teaching at South, and I came across, it was winter break. I came across this YouTube video of this guy, like in his 20s, and it was a piece on YouTube, and I looked for it over and over, and I cannot find it. And it makes you start to wonder, like, did I just imagine this happening? But it had to have been real at some point. But he stood on the side. He would commute back and forth through the city of Washington, D.C., and he would see all these people like in their cars just facing forward and not recognizing what was around them, the little landmarks, the other people, nothing. So he got a giant whiteboard and he wrote a quote or something positive on this whiteboard, and he would stand by the side of the highway and just hold up this board. And every day he stood in the same spot. He held up a different comment, question, something positive for these people. And he started to notice that people started to recognize him. And he started to post pictures and videos of what he was doing. and people started to recognize him on the internet and started to swing by and take pictures of him and then post it on their social media. And I'm blanking at the moment of what his hashtag was, and it was my original hashtag. Like when I first started doing this, I put his hashtag, and it wasn't like a quotes to live by or anything like that. So if you go super deep into my Instagram account, like you can find it, and I've got it somewhere. And so he did this, and I said, people walk into my classroom all the time, and my classroom is in my hallway is kind of set in from the hallway just a little bit. So like if you're coming from the correct side, you can see my door clear as day all the way down the hallway. But you're coming from the opposite side, you just swing the corner, you never have any clue what's up there. So I had this big empty space. So I took a whiteboard and I tacked it to the wall. I just thumbtacked it to the wall, and I started writing quotes on there. I just went to the internet and I find quotes that I like, something short that can easily be read as you're walking down the hallway. Sometimes one of my favorite quotes, I always post it up the day before midterms, is a quote by one of my students. And it was something she was saying to herself right before taking the AP exam in my class. And she said, "I am not defined by the score on this test."
Oh my gosh.
And so every single year for the last 11 years, she gets a Christina Sweeney, wherever you are out there. She gets a quote on my board. Sometimes kids bring me quotes. Sometimes I hunt down the quotes. It's a little bit of everything, but I've been doing it now for 11 or 12 years, and thousands of quotes have been up on that board in multiple locations as I've moved around the school to different classrooms. So kind of where I started. And so sometimes it inspires people. I had a security guard who used to do rounds on the second floor, and he would knock on my door. If I wasn't good about changing my quote that day, he would knock on the door and goes, "Where's the new quote? What's going on?" And I know on the day he retired, he came by and he goes, "Just want to let you know that you were my first stop. Today's my last day of work. I wanted to stop here and see what your words of awesome were." So like, I know it's having an impact out there. It's, you don't always know how you're impacting. I think that's education in general.
Yeah, I think so too, right? It's like this sort of like little drip of ideas that are percolating, and you never know what's going to hit when. But that really hit me that, if you can't make a mistake, you can't make anything. And I just, this podcast is about math. So, you're talking that you're a STEM teacher, right? And so, and teaching science, I feel like science and math are like very close cousins. And I also find that like some kids are turned off by science and turned off by math. And sometimes I think it's because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from my perspective, sometimes I think it's because they're just afraid they're going to make mistakes, and they do define themselves somehow, or maybe their families or whatever the situation is, define themselves by that number on the paper, which is that student, I forget her first name, Sweeney was the last name, but how she said, "I'm not defined by this number." I'm like, awesome. It's like, I'm not defined by the mistakes that I made, or maybe the mistakes help. I don't know. I'm going to say things. So I want to hear more about this quote. Like what was it about this quote?
Well, let me jump into what you just said there. So obviously in chemistry as I describe it on the first day to students is, if math and science had a child, that child would be chemistry.
I love it.
Kids who have struggles in math and kids who have struggles in science now are going to double that struggle or triple that struggle. And in fact, a kid today, we just started math for the first time in the school year in chemistry, and he turned to me and said, "Great, now I have 2 algebra classes in a day." And I'm like, "Yep, yes, you do. Sorry, that's just the fact of this is what it is." So one of the things I started doing, oh gosh, before I came to South, so it's probably 15 years or so now. I have these personal whiteboards that I keep in my classroom, and I make them myself. I don't buy the little ones that you get from the store, from the catalogs. I go to Home Depot. It's a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of whiteboard. I have Home Depot cut it down for me, and I turn it into 24 by 16 inch. So it's a huge piece of whiteboard.
Yeah.
It is actually the size of my desk, and that's how I came up with the dimensions. It's the size of the desk for my students. And every student has the opportunity to use a whiteboard. And what I have found is the use of the whiteboard is transformative in my classroom, because when you make a mistake on a piece of paper, even if you erase it, that mistake always leaves a residue. Like there's a ghost image of your failure. And a lot of students will make a mistake and literally crumple up a mostly empty piece of paper and throw it out and start with a brand new piece of paper because that mistake is haunting them. The
Hmm.
whiteboard, when you erase from a whiteboard, it's erased from existence. It's gone. All your mistakes gone. So I find that kids are more likely to pick up the whiteboard, especially when we're first trying something, than they are to do it on paper because they can make all the mistakes they want. I can correct it right there on the whiteboard in the moment and give it right back to them. So I give them immediate feedback, and anything they do wrong, they just wipe clean and they start from scratch, and boom, it's all about mindset is
Yeah.
really what it's about.
Yeah.
It's not about what you're doing. It's about turning on a set of rules that the kids didn't know could exist for themselves, or removing rules and letting them just be free to try.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so let's talk about this freedom to try. This freedom to try and do. So a little sneak peek is before we had this conversation, I went on your YouTube channel and I just did a quick cursory overview. So I didn't watch a lot, but what I did see was exactly what I was supposed to see. And it was, you said something that my students have, I think it was, you were talking to alternate route teachers or something like that. I think that's what the context of the recording was. And you were talking about students having the freedom to try and do and the freedom to make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
That mistakes are actually this necessary part of learning, which is what Marva Collins said on your whiteboard. And the experiment, I don't know how long ago this was for you, but the experiment you had that students doing, it had something to do with a Dorito.
Well, okay, so there's a couple of things. Yeah, so I know what you're talking about. So I do this experiment in chemistry, in thermochemistry, when we study heat, and it's called the calories in a food lab. And what they do is they try to boil water in a soda can using a piece of food, and it's usually a Dorito, a Cheeto, something like that. So one of the things that people don't understand is when you look on the back of the package, that thing that says calories is the amount of heat that your body creates, the amount of energy your body creates by digesting that food. And we talk about it in terms of it's a chemistry term, it's a science term, it's called a calorie. We have it as a food calorie. You always notice it's capitalized because food calories are different than heat calories because of a variety of things. Not going to go into the science.
Yeah.
But so one of the questions at the end of that lab is, could you use any food in this lab? We do specifically Cheetos and Doritos because the oil content makes them huge flames. I'm not talking small flames. I'm talking about 9 to 12-inch flames coming off these Cheetos and Doritos. And it's amazing. It is an Instagram wonder zone in my classroom. Kids are pulling out pictures, snapping photos, videos, you name it. So they heat up this can. They find that it'll go up 12 or 15. Sometimes I get it up to 40 degrees hotter than it was. We've never boiled water, but we've gotten close a couple times. And so I had students, and one of the questions, the extension questions was, could you use any food in this experiment? And the simple answer is real fast, no, because like soup would not work because
right.
we're putting it on a paper clip. Like the way the experiment is designed, you really need a solid food that you can latch onto a paper clip. But the kids said to me, they're like, well, yes. And I said, okay, how do you know? And they're like, well, can we test it? And I said, sure. And so they went around the room, and it happened to be right before lunch. So they were able to grab like random pieces of people's food. But we had a banana, we had part of a Snickers bar, we had all sorts of things. And so these 4 boys sat there and tried to figure out how they could burn these various things. And you learn very quickly, you can't burn chocolate. You can't burn a banana. Bananas get black, but they never catch on fire. There's too high of a water content. So they tried to do this. And so over the course of like 30 minutes, this question could have been answered in 2 minutes. No, soup would not work. Boom, done. You're finished. Answered the question. But over the course of 30 minutes, they went and tested out their hypothesis. And we got to the end and I said, okay, what's the answer? And they said, no, all of these foods should burn. All of these foods have calories. We know they have calories, but none of them burn. I said, so you can get calories from a food, but you can't do it in this experiment. So like getting them to experience that is huge. One of the other things I talk about every year I've been presenting at that alternate route conference now, I think it's 5 or 6 years, and I'll be presenting again in March. And one of the pictures I pull up is this picture of, again, 4 boys. It just happens to be that way. It's not always, it's just a coincidence. I have had lots of females do similar things, and I could talk about that too. But I had these 4 boys. We do an experiment with baking soda and vinegar, and we try to capture the carbon dioxide that's created from the reaction in a balloon.
Oh.
And so the balloons can get big,
Yeah.
but they never get huge. And so they said to me, how much baking soda and vinegar would we have to use in order to pop the balloon? And I said, that is an excellent question. So they said, can we try it? And I'm like, sure. I just so happen to have a 1 liter test tube. And a 1 liter test tube is a very large test tube.
Yeah.
And so they said, okay. I said, but you got to show me the math to prove that it'll work. I said, you can't just dump in random stuff. You've got to get it just right. So we're talking about stoichiometry. It's all about balancing the amount of stuff that's in a reaction to make sure you use all of your vinegar and all of your baking soda so nothing's left over. So they had to show me all their calculations. They had to show me their experimental design. We set the whole thing up. I've got this beautiful picture. One of the boys is actually working in town. He's side note, he happens to be a physical therapist at a new place on Route 35. So I just so happen to know that. But so he's like in his mid-20s right now. But we have this beautiful picture, and his face is aglow as we have this 1 liter test tube and this balloon. And this balloon is absolutely massive, and it never popped.
What?
And it never popped. And what we learned, we actually ended up learning an interesting chemistry principle that none of us knew. Even I didn't know this was going to happen. I expected the balloon to explode. And what happens is it creates so much pressure in the balloon that the balloon actually forces the carbon dioxide back into the liquid and essentially carbonates the water that's created in the reaction because it's such a high thing. So, but I never thought about it. Like the whole thing happened and I'm like, what? And I messaged all my chemistry friends and they said, I think it's an equilibrium situation. And we started getting into the science and I'm like, oh, very interesting. But the whole point was they asked a question and I said, okay, why not? Let's go try it. Let's go test it out. I had some students, female students, turn to me and said, I don't like the lab that you've got assigned to us. Can we design our own lab? And I said, absolutely. So they spent 2 or 3 80-minute periods of time designing their own lab experiment, trying to decide what type of coffee cup is the best coffee cup to get their Starbucks in.
That's really cool.
And I already knew the answer, but I said, sure, go ahead, do it. My lab would have taken them 80-minute block. Instead, they took 3 80-minute blocks, and they had to learn about thermochemistry and calorimetry and all this other, like what's a calorimeter and the heat of a calorimeter, the fact that your coffee cup gains heat before it transfers the heat out. And they had to figure out why they were losing heat. They were doing the math and they were ending up with this big gap in their answers. And so we had to talk about how these coffee cups gain heat first. And then that heat is then lost in the calculations, et cetera, et cetera. So they learned college level not college prep. They were doing college chemistry experiments. I did almost that exact experiment in a chemistry lab my junior year of college. That's what they were doing because they didn't like what I had offered to them. So they wanted to do their own thing.
But also it sounds to me like you set up conditions in your classroom to not make them feel like worried about making a mistake, right? Or maybe that
100%.
I don't know if that came out right, but like you set up conditions for them to like mistakes are necessary. Like you got to mess up. You've got to have a mistake in order to be able to push the learning forward.
Absolutely. And I very rarely tell my kids no.
Yeah.
Very rarely tell them no. The only time I ever say, especially in innovation design, the only time I ever say no is if it's dangerous or it's going to catch on fire. Those are the only 2 things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I say to them, I have concerns. That's my most common phrase in innovation is I have concerns. I don't like the direction this is going, but the only way you're going to learn is if you do it yourself and you fail and you test it and you try it. Let's do it again. And yesterday I had a kid glue 2 things together and I said, that's not going to work. And he goes, why? And literally when he said why, it snapped in his hand. I'm like, that's why, because you didn't glue it properly. And he's like, but it was holding. And I'm like, yeah, it was holding in that moment, But as soon as you put any type of pressure on that location,
Yeah.
it snapped. I said,
Yeah.
now let's talk about what would be better. He's like, okay, I think I need to drill a hole. I'm like, let's go learn how to use a power drill. And we went and learned how to use the power drill to drill a hole, to put the rod through, and then glue it from both sides. This way it's more secure. So, like, and again, I give the kids plenty of freedom to do that. Chemistry is stricter. I have a set curriculum.
Yeah.
I've got
Right.
a midterm, a final, like I've got due dates that have to happen. I have major assessments and minor assessments. But even then, I have students, they work on example problems, and I'll have them go to the whiteboard, or I'll hand them my tablet and I'll say, write your answer on the tablet. And they'll say, but is it right? And I said, I don't know. We'll find out. Because
Mm.
the other thing I always say to kids is, if you are making the mistake, I guarantee there's 6 or 8 or 10 other people in this class who are making the same mistake. You just happen to be the one who's doing it publicly. They're all doing
Mm.
quietly at their desk. So I said, this gives other people the support, the knowledge that they're not alone in the
Yeah.
mistake process.
Right.
So I'm like, let's make the mistake. This way, if you make the mistake, I can show everyone else how not to make that mistake later.
Yeah. I like the idea of like, let's make this mistake together. Like, let's make
Yeah.
the mistake public, right? I can't remember which country it is, but I know that it's an Asian country where when they ask, this is in math specifically, when they ask, I'm gonna like, I feel like open mouth insert foot, but I know that it's like in the Eastern hemisphere. The the deal is that in a classroom, when students are working on a math problem, the teacher actually will select the student who's done the problem incorrectly first. Or right, because a lot of times in classrooms, like you just mentioned a minute ago, like you have constraints, right? You have a time constraints, you have midterm and a final, you've got to get through a curriculum. Same thing with math teachers, right? It's like we've got to get through. But when we take that student where the example of the student's work and make the mistake public, I think it changes the perspective on like what it means to like do work, period. I don't care what kind of work it is, problem solving, any type of work, right? And I think especially in our like Instagram moment, years right now where we are in this era that we're in of everything is so polished and these kids are seeing things polished online. I think that makes takes it to a whole nother level, which I wasn't expecting to get into that. But how do you, like, what do you do with students who are like, oh, I'm afraid to make the mistake, or are they afraid?
That's most of them.
Yeah.
No, they're most of them. Most of them don't want to take that risk. There's very few kids who want to take the leap. That they want to take a calculated leap before they take a leap. And some kids won't leap at all. Like,
Yeah.
it's every day. Like, it's got to be, it's not a once in a while type of thing in my class. It's an everyday thing. What are you doing? What are you trying? What are you going to do? Like, what's going to be, what are we going to test today? I used to have a poster on my door that said, part of the mess, but we're learning here, or something like that, or learning is happening. And I say all the time, first day of school, chemistry is a contact sport. You have to get dirty in order to learn what's going on. That's it. Like, the kids who play it safe are not going to do well in my class. You have to try and do it. And if you do it wrong, great. Let's try it again. And it goes to everything. Like, one of the things I do in my class is, so there's two things. So if you have any educators who are listening, and you're like, that sounds great, but this was not an overnight thing. This was, some of it was like, it came from that, but I have been doing it this way since 2010. There's two things that I had to change about myself and how I run my classroom to make all this happen. Number one was I realized that all traditional assignments had to go away. Everything had to change. If I was changing the mindset on my class, I had to change the mindset on everything. So in my classroom, I took like what would be a 20 or 30-minute quiz, and I boiled it down to one question. And now it's one question, one topic, one question. That's it. Done. 5 points, finished, done. So the kids can do that quiz and get it done and move on. If a kid and I do the same thing for homework, I give no outside of class homework, not traditionally. The only thing I do for homework is I ask kids to look at the world around them. So like I want to see chemistry in the world around them. But my daily homeworks are all done in class. They're longer than quizzes. They're more points than quizzes. And they start to combine ideas together.
Yeah.
but I want the support system that I have in the classroom. If you're going to fail, you want to do it where the safety net is, where the expert is. You don't want to do it at home where you're going to cheat and look it up on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So my big thing is if a kid brings me a quiz and it's miserable, I'm like, okay, let's talk. I go over the whole quiz with them. I explain where they got it wrong. I show them how to do it right. Then I hand them a different version of the same quiz because I have 8 or 10 versions of the quiz. I hand them a different version because what I'm testing is not knowledge. I'm testing skills in my class. We're
Yeah.
growing skills. So, and I give it back to them. Now they know I don't
Yeah.
have to worry about getting it wrong on the first try. If I get it wrong, I'm going to get my points back. Same thing. I just gave a project. I had a lot of students do the project wrong, even though the rubric was there, the bullet points were there. So I returned those projects back to those kids. I gave them suggestions. If they return it back to me without following my suggestions, well, guess what? I gave you the chance. Now I'm going to grade it. But otherwise, I want what's done. I want it done right. I don't want it done on time.
Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. And it sounds like, you're giving your students an opportunity to be like, if you don't get right on the first try, that's okay. Right. And
Yeah.
because that's life. Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's the point. It's like, if we're going to make amazing things in this world, we need to have that freedom to get it wrong the first time. The guest
Yeah.
that I had, the guest that I talked to yesterday, she, I don't know, she failed pre-calc 3 times. Well, anyway, she has her PhD in math from Stanford University. And
There you go.
and she's like, I finally figured it out when I got to XYZ point. And I'm like, right. But the point is, she didn't give up. And somewhere along the way, there was somebody in her life who was able to give her what she needed and help her to succeed. And it wasn't because she just took the class that many times. It was like she finally had an experience where everything started to make sense. And she wasn't just memorizing and following steps. So,
Right.
right. Yeah.
One of the things I say to students all the time, and I say it to adults too, I hate the phrase when people say, I'm not a something person. I'm not a math person. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not an art person. You're not a math person right now. You're not an art person right now. You may be a math person in 15 years. Your brain at this moment does not understand the X, whatever that happens to be, that thing.
Right.
But you have no idea what it's going to come up in the future. I had a miserable art experience in middle school. I had a teacher tell me I did it wrong, did art wrong. And I never took another art class after that.
Mm-hmm.
Never wanted to do that. Fast forward to 2019,
Yeah.
and we ended up with a laser cutter at school. And I had already been working with 3D printers, and I learned how to do design work on 3D printers. And we got a laser cutter. And we go into the pandemic, and I take this laser cutter and the 3D printer home to my house. And I said, well, we just got this $5,000 piece of equipment. I got to learn how to use it because when we come back, I got to show teachers how to incorporate it into their class. Well, now I design custom wood signs for doors and classrooms and all sorts of things. I have banners and et cetera. I think
Did
that I bought this stuff
Did you do the ones that were
and
hanging in the hallway outside of your classroom? I also saw a picture of
all the
those.
ones that are hanging, all the ones that
Yes.
are hanging outside my classroom, they're not from the laser cutter. Those are printed out and
Oh,
stuff.
okay. Okay. Good.
But all the wood signs that you can see in my classroom, the things I post on the internet, they're all things that I made. And I don't call myself an artist. I'm not like that. I'm not designing
Mm-hmm.
art. I'm a creative. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
creator of things. I use a creative mind to approach a situation. And a lot of times all I'm doing is I'm finding someone else's work and I try to put my own spin on it. And I try to do it my way, or I try to do
Yeah.
it like, oh, how could they have done that? If I can replicate that for myself, well, that's me being creative. My art teacher friends laugh at me. They're like, you're doing art. And I'm like, it's not art. Like, stop saying that because I never considered I can't draw a stick figure. Like,
Yeah.
it's like my artistic skills of drawing is terrible and my sculpting is way worse. But you give me technology, myself how to use the design programs, and I learned how to do a laser cutter, and I learned how to design things on 3D printers. So you can become something later in life. Just because you're not it now doesn't mean you will never be it.
Yeah. I love it. And it's about shifting that perspective on like, what you're thinking, and also I think there's this pressure and then I think we're going to start to wrap up, but I think there's this pressure of like, in order to be that quote unquote person, you have to always get everything right. Right.
Yes.
So like your art teacher who said, you're not doing art right. It's like, well, that was her perspective or their perspective on what art meant to them. And
Right.
you now see it art as a, well, yeah, so you're doing art from your own perspective. And yeah, I just think that's really interesting. And I'm sure that the first time you use that laser cutter, you probably, well, I don't know. Did you get it right the first try?
Oh God, no, I set things on fire in there. Like it was so bad. I had to stand over it. Now I know I can walk away from the device, but like the first couple, oh yeah, I had the wrong settings. It was bad news. And even tomorrow, a teacher's bringing me a piece of wood and he wants to know if I can do some custom work on this custom engraving on this wood for a project that he's working on and I
Yeah.
turned to him and I said, yeah, absolutely. Let's do this. 5 years ago, I would have laughed. I'm like, no, I'll never be able to do that. But
Yeah.
now I know I can walk in there and do something that is going to be perfect for what he's looking for.
I love it. Amazing. Awesome. Okay, so much to unpack in this episode. I just love this conversation, but I think you've been teaching all day, and I've been working all day, so it's time to wrap things up. If you had, so I always ask each of my guests because you're a teacher. I ask the guests who are teachers. Not all my guests are teachers, but I ask my guests if you could give advice to a early career teacher, somebody who's been in the job for less than 3 years, and they're walking into a classroom every single day and they're thinking, am I making a difference? Or maybe they're doubting themselves a little bit because from being a teacher, and I know from my experience that those first 3 years can be rough. So what would you say to either your younger self or to an early career teacher about teaching?
Oh, that's a hard one. I would love to say it gets easier, but it doesn't. Um, I would say I work as hard now as I did in my first couple years. I know that's not true of every teacher. There are some teachers who find a groove and they just groove it out and I would say like they're carving the Grand Canyon of teaching. Like that's it. They're just grinding through. I don't teach like that. I would say teaching is hard and it's not a job. It's an occupation. Teaching is a lifestyle. It's a mental thing that you get into that a lot of people don't understand. I have a lot of friends who are not teachers and they just like when they're done with their day, they're done with their day. They could punch out and they're finished. They don't think about their job until they show up the next day. And I come home and I'm still answering questions and responding to emails. But I would say so from 25 years of perspective and family, having family and children and doing all that stuff, I would say the biggest thing is for those early teachers is find balance. You need to find a balance between your personal life, what you love to do, and your teaching life and what you love to do there. And last year I had a really rough year and to the point where I straight up wrote my resignation letters several times during the course of the year. I was like, I don't care if I'm so close to 25, I'm done. I just had a really bad year. And this year I'm having an amazing year. A lot of things can shift and you have to focus and you have to say it's like both good and bad, this too shall pass. The good times will pass, the bad times will pass. You have to power through. You have to give it time and just find balance. Remember that work is still work, but it's a lifestyle. Teaching is a life choice, not a job. So it's so much more than that. I guess I don't know if that was clear enough, but
Yeah, I think
that's what I would say to new teachers. That's what I say to the alternate route teachers who come in, who are of a variety of ages, of a variety of backgrounds, a variety of ethnicities. And I say, your first couple years are going to be your hardest. Year one is the worst. Year two, you start to figure out what you did wrong in year one. You fix those. Year three, you're like, oh, I got this thing. And then year four, year four shows up and it's like, what were you thinking? And you start to change things and you start to alter it and you start to realize, no, wait, I should do it this way. I should try this. Always try to change things and keep things fresh for yourself because that's the only way you're going to make it through the career, keeping it fresh.
I love it. Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time and expertise tonight. I learned so much from you about chemistry and mistakes. And where can people find you? Like if they wanted to follow you or they wanted more of Mark Siegel, where could they look?
All the places. I am Dare to Awesome, Dareto Awesome, AWESOM. YouTube, Instagram. I'm technically on TikTok, but I don't really post on TikTok. I more watch TikTok. TikTok is more TV for me than it is
Yeah.
posting. But yeah, so Instagram, you can see pictures. It's a balance of my personal life and my work life. And YouTube is where I host all my videos and whatnot.
Awesome. All right. I'll put all that in the show notes too. So, all right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
I'm Pam Brett. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Blue Glasses Math. Please follow me wherever you get your podcasts and follow along on the conversation on Instagram. And remember, being a math person is all just a matter of perspective.